Hello, this is Gareth. Welcome along to the Somewhere on Earth podcast for Tuesday, the 4th of June, 2024. I'm here in our wonderful studio here in London. We have guests from various places. I don't mean to sound vague there, but you'll get the hang of it as we get into the show. And with us today for some experting is journalist Pete Guest. How are you, Pete?
I'm Gareth. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Not seen you for a few weeks, but you look on fine form, as ever. Just to jump in before we get into the content, a lovely message here from Patricia, who has linked to an Economist article. This is on our Facebook group. An Economist article talking about podcasting and how the medium has turned 20 years old, apparently, which I guess is down to how you define the beginning of podcasting. I'm not going to get too hung up on that, but let's just take it for granted that podcasting is now 20 years old. Patricia says, podcasting is in the ascendance. I think this is good news for Somewhere on Earth. I'm happy for podcasting to be all about the audio, even though apparently video is the way it's at. But Patricia says, I'm happy for it all to be about the audio so it can be listened to in the car and on the go. And I know pedants will be saying, yeah, you can watch video on the go, but I think the point being not necessarily if you're driving or using heavy machinery.
Exactly. I was going to say, please don't watch video on the go.
Please do not do that. But Patricia goes on to say, producer Anya Literovich is multi-talented on both sides of the glass. She makes an excellent presenter's friend. Well, good news for you, Patricia. We're going to hear from Anya on this side of the glass in our next edition. There we are. That goes out to you, Patricia. Thank you for that. Let's get going. And coming up today, US tech companies are enthusiastically locating data centers in Chile, but environmental campaigners are concerned. We'll be finding out why and what, if anything, the tech companies have been saying about the issue. And in Africa, a bio-alternative to concrete is throwing up fresh questions about the water, land, and especially energy-related costs of producing it. That's all right here on the Somewhere on Earth podcast. Chile is enthusiastically opening itself up to the data center market. 16 data centers have been approved over the last 12 years. 28 have just been announced. But there is a slight technical problem here. The centers use millions of litres of water, and Chile is in the midst of a drought. Santiago and its surrounding metropolitan area is now a major data center hub. The government says it's stepping in to regulate the industry, but the concerns still remain. Daniela Dib is Latin America reporter for the excellent Rest of World publication and has just co-authored an investigation to all this. She joins us now. Hello, Daniela. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Lovely. So can you just set out what the problem is here? The extent of the problem, just how much data center development have we been seeing in Chile and how much are we set to see?
For sure. So we found a really interesting government policy announced by the by the end of May, in which President Boric announced that to the 22 existing data centers in the country, they would expect to bring in 28 more. And that is remarkable given that Chile has 19 million people and 7 million of them live in the Santiago metropolitan area. And it's definitely a really high data center concentration per population in Latin America. Brazil is also a big data center hub, but Chile is remarkable in this sense. And it's even more interesting that they are all in the capital city. And this is something that has been happening for the past 12 years because an area in Santiago's metro region has been legally sort of like determined for industrial exploitation for years. It's an area that has a lot of beer factories. It has other types of really big, like high water consuming industries there. And on top of that, data centers are being added to the region. So the Chilean government has been very, very pressing on the fact that they want data centers to come into the country because it wants to sort of like gear Chile as being a technological hub around, specifically in Latin America, but around the world too. And it was just striking for Claudia Urquieta and I, she's my co-reporter, she's based in Santiago, to see that there has been a lot of pushback from local activists, especially because there is a drought in Chile. Since 2010, the rainfall sort of levels have been reducing, and it's been expected to it's expected to last until 2040. So
Wow.
they are concerned about
Right.
such
So,
big high water
sure.
consumption.
So a major drought then, especially extrapolating out to 2040 and not really expecting a whole lot of improvements in the situation. So clearly a concern over water consumption, but can we sort of quantify that a little bit in terms of the amount of water that we're talking about, or maybe the amount of water that Chile frankly lacks to service these data centers?
Yeah, so it was brought to our attention by the activists that there are wetlands in some of the areas in Santiago that have been under hydric stress, which means that due to the drought, they are not being able to sustain local fauna. That there's like a lot of efforts of trying to sustain them or even keep them safe. And given that there are 16 data centers in the area, and on average, each data center consumes 25 million liters, it's definitely a problem. And we
Yeah. So
should
you
note,
say
I should note,
25 million litres, is that per year or per day or?
per year, sorry, and
Right. Okay. Yeah. Got that. Yeah.
yeah, a small
Sure.
data center that uses 1 megawatt of power, but on average, like most larger data centers have to use 100 megawatts per year. So that's like 100 times the amount of water that they need. And we did focus on US tech companies, although they are not the only ones that are putting data centers in the region. But we chose this because they have the largest pushback and they are also the highest water consuming. Their Google data center in the commune of Quilicura, which was the first one there, it got water usage permits that allow them to extract 1 billion liters per year or 50 liters per second, which is massive. On paper, that's what they say. They can extract them from the local wetlands.
So what does this mean for residents? Are people in Chile being told to cut down on their water, perhaps, while the data centers are so busy slurping up all this water?
So this is something very interesting that the activists told us. We talked to about a dozen people, most of them activists, and they mentioned that it was very hard to campaign against these big tech companies precisely because it haven't implied that people would get water cuts. And the data centers are not that visible. They just look like very, very large buildings, but no one really knows if you're not a data center sort of savvy person, you don't know how they look like. So they did mention something that I thought was one of the reasons why maybe big tech companies go there, that in Chile, water rights are private. So the government has assigned water rights to private people or companies for decades, like for a while. And these are the ones who are in charge of like distributing the water. So it doesn't affect the public water supply. But it does affect the wetlands and the fact that there are whole ecosystems under there who depend on them. And that was what worried them.
Yeah. Now, Peter, you've seen a fair few data centers in your time and crypto mining operations, and I guess they don't have a big sign on top saying data center in big neon letters, so they're fairly anonymous buildings, aren't they? But what are you making of what you're hearing? You know, this incredible water consumption, which I suppose I should add, by the way, is for cooling, isn't it? In case people are wondering what all the water's being used for, so it's cooling of all the processing cores in the data center. But what are you hearing here?
Sure. I mean, we talked about this on the podcast a few times around crypto as well as AI. And, you know, I'm sort of mildly obsessed by this idea of the physical and human geography of these technologies that we, as consumers, just experience as being digital. And, you know, we use this idea that software just sort of scales endlessly, right? It's a very light business. It's not like a manufacturing where you have to create new factories to make new things. And that's like part of their narrative, right? The idea of this limitless growth, limitless upside. But as we see AI being rolled out, you're starting to see how limited that actually is. And as it gets integrated into so many parts of the internet, the hardware demands just grow and grow and grow and grow. And they have to add huge amounts of physical infrastructure, physical spaces, power, and water. And I know that's not new. We've had this conversation before in other businesses, but it's something the industry has to reckon with. Like the they'll say, well, the demand for power and water can get fixed. We're going to get better software, better chips, develop new algorithms. But we're already at this point where the demand is crossing with the supply, and you have to answer these ethical, physical, human questions. Like, should we ever be in a position where AI is automatically outcompeting homes and farms and environment, wetlands, and so on for water or electricity just because it's got more capital behind it? It can pay for it and somebody else can't.
I suppose, it's all very well apportioning blame and so on, but is it kind of down to us as users? Because I know I do, I benefit from these cloud services. I have cloud storage myself. This very script I'm looking at here is sitting, it's a shared script that is probably and definitely sitting in some data center somewhere doing its own little bit to increase energy usage and water consumption. Or is it kind of simplistic to blame consumers because this is the technology environment that we've been built up, and I don't have much choice. If I want to share a script with somebody, short of actually sending around a piece of paper, if I want to do it on a computer, it's kind of going to have to end up in the cloud anyway. I don't know. It's a tricky one.
Well, I think blaming consumers is a little bit of a get out at times. I think we do need to start talking about how much value AI unlocks in economies, right? We assume that it's going to be great. They talk about trillions of dollars of opportunity. It's going to make jobs more efficient. Healthcare is going to be better and so on. And so a lot of that might well be real. But you have to look at how the value gets distributed in society, right? And the physical infrastructure is a really good way at measuring that and looking at that. So I'm thinking about the UK, right? We talked about this as a kind of a Chile problem, but this is a global problem. And look at where a lot of data centers are clustering here in the UK. They're in post-industrial places where there's loads of power, loads of excess infrastructure, like South Wales, where factories closed, steelworks closed, thousands of people lost their jobs. Is the data center going to come back and create the same number of jobs? Well, no. And are the people who are living there going to get the equivalent value out of the AI, or is that value going to flow to somebody else? We often think about kind of extractive industries as being relatively kind of colonial in their shape. There's a little bit of that being replaced here as well. So yes, we have a responsibility, but is it our fault? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and the activists, Daniela, in Chile, they're talking about this as being extractivism, isn't it? That's a term that has been coined here.
Yes.
And I see it in your article.
And yes, and adding a little bit to what you were you and Pete were mentioning before, I think the type of activists that were engaged or are still engaged in the pushback against data centers in Chile, they are very, very well versed in how the entire data center industry works, and that was, I think, exemplary of the Chilean social and civic organization, and the fact that they are also being in conversations with researchers who are also investigating about this problem around the world. Marina Otero Bercier, she's a Spanish researcher who works at Columbia, and she works also with the activists in Chile to try to sort of negotiate with the country. And she also told me that this is happening in Spain, that there's a cluster of data centers being brought up in that country. And the local activists are the ones that I talked to, were really stressed on the fact that you just mentioned, right? Like, data centers are big physical infrastructure that don't necessarily produce or need a lot of employment, and they just extract natural resources, because it's not only the water. The water is the biggest concern, but it also implies particle pollution, which is the pollution that goes up in the air, and obviously like energy consumption and such. So they are very, very aware. They're a handful of people, but they're very much aware of what this industry takes away from them. And one of them told me something really telling. She said they were tired that Chile was sort of like the backyard of the world in terms of extractivism. I think adding up to all of the other industries that, or the other materials that are extracted in the country, lithium, etc.
Well, look, Daniel, let's leave it for now for this part of the podcast. The subscribers can hear a bit more from you just after the main part of the podcast. And as I said in the introduction, for its part, the government in Chile says it's looking into regulation, but I don't see any great evidence that there are huge regulatory steps it's been taken. And I think, Daniela, you're nodding there as well. All right, now let's continue talking about environmental consequences now. This is to do with bio-based building materials made from fungi and agricultural residues. And these are known as mycelium composites, and they're an environmentally friendly alternative to concrete, except maybe they're not. Producing these biomaterials uses a whole lot of electricity. However, a study also says that these harms can be alleviated by bringing in alternative energy sources, bringing those into production. Well, let's hear more from the lead author of a study that's just been looking at these environmental aspects. Stefania Akromah joins us from the University of Bristol in the southwest of England. Nice to be with you, Stefania. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hi, nice to be with you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for being
talk
here.
About my work on your platform.
Let's get into it. So, mycelium composites for building and construction. So that's the full name. They're abbreviated to MCBs, aren't they? So what's this fungi? Is it and some related biomaterials that can be somehow made into building materials?
So as you said in the introduction, mycelium composites are basically bio-based materials made from agricultural waste and mycelium, which is the roots of mushrooms. Mycelium composites have gained a lot of interest because of their numerous advantages, which include the fact that they are bio-based. They are made using an energy efficient manufacturing process. And at the end of life, they can be biodegraded or composted into useful products like fertilizers and things like that, which reduces the impact on the environment.
Yeah, and so they can be fashioned into effectively building blocks, can they? Or are they, so they can pre-existing blocks that could be used for buildings or any kind of construction.
Yes. So because of how the mycelium composites are made, they can be pretty much molded into any shape you want. So the way a mycelium composite is made is that so fungi or mushrooms grow by feeding onto organic matter. And as they feed on it, they grow by mass. So if you place this organic matter into a mold of your desired shape, say a block to make a brick, then you can actually obtain this final composite in that same shape.
So really, so far it sounds almost too good to be true. These are biomaterials. They have many of the properties that makes concrete attractive, but don't have, well, at least we didn't think they had as greater environmental impact as concrete. Yet we're about to hear from you in your research about those impacts. Can we just scope this out a little bit about where you've been investigating this? Because this seems to be in an African context. You've compared the situation across 7 countries in Africa, including Mozambique, DRC, Ethiopia, Zambia, Kenya. Those are a few that I counted in your paper, and you're taking Ghana as a baseline. So why are you looking specifically at the continent of Africa?
So some of us are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals as set by the United Nations, which I aim to end poverty, inequality, protect the planet, and all of that good stuff. The main aim for setting these goals is to ensure that no country is left behind. But unfortunately, developing countries have fallen behind because they are constrained by limited financial resources. So because mycelium composites are basically made out of waste materials from the agricultural and agro-industrial sectors, they are considered a cost-effective solution. And also the simple manufacturing process that does not require significant and expensive equipment makes it also cost-effective. So I proposed mycelium composites for the many benefits it can have for the African country. For the African continent, which include providing alternative renewable materials to the construction industry, for example. But it can also serve as a waste management approach for agricultural waste, which in many of these countries is abandoned in the open field or incinerated for the lack of efficient systems to get rid of this waste. Also, this technology, as I explained in my previous review paper, can also offer financial benefits to many African countries as well as other developing countries, which include generating revenue for smallholder farmers, which can sell some of these agricultural waste and residues. Also, startups engaging in mycelium composites manufacturing can generate employment opportunity for the youth and other amazing advantages of this technology.
All right, well, let's get into the downsides, many of which you're looking into in this study. And you looked at, for instance, things like the travel distance. So can you source this stuff locally, or does it kind of rack up carbon miles, as it were, in transport? What about the water use? Back on water again, the use of land. But you homed in especially on electricity use. So just begin by telling me how electricity is used in this process and then what you found in terms of its impact.
All right, so in order to understand how much electricity is used, I have to quickly go through the manufacturing process for a mycelium composite. So in simple words, you have to obtain this organic biomass from the site where it's generated, so from a local farm or from an agro-industrial processing site. Then you would transport this material to the mycelium composites manufacturing site. Now, because fungi require a very sterile environment and growing medium, every material and every tool that's used to produce a mycelium composite needs to be sterilized. And this sterilization occurs in autoclaves or sterilizers that run by electricity. So once everything is sterilized, we can add the fungal mass to the organic material, and then we pour it into the molds. Once it's molded, the material now needs to be incubated. So you would use incubators, which also run by electricity. And the incubation process can last anywhere from 4 weeks to 2 or 3 months. So, which means you'd be actually using electricity for that long of a period. And once the mycelium composite is fully grown, you remove it from the molds, and then you need to dry them in order to kill the fungus. And this also takes about 48 hours in an oven, which is typically powered by electricity. So from this basic explanation I've given, you can see how electricity is a huge part in the manufacturing process for mycelium composite.
Yeah. Okay. No, sure. I really get that kind of energy and intensity there. Pete Guest, then, what do you think about all this?
No, it's interesting. It's staying on the theme of the physical limits of technology. And, as a kind of caveat, I love the idea of new materials and, less carbon intensive forms of construction or any of the industries. We see these industries that bump up against planetary boundaries. So farming, we saw vertical farming, alternative meats, seaweed, plastics, and the materials. And they all seem to have enormous potential. And it's great that people are investing in exploring them. But there's always that alluring idea that there's going to be an easy technological fix for a complicated problem, right? That we're going to come up with that too good to be true, as you put it, kind of hack, cheat code. And I think what this research shows is that it's really valuable for us to think very critically about that techno fix and be very rational, understand the impact, all the way through the chain.
And this is why this kind of research really helps and really matters. And I suppose an obvious follow-up question from that is the role that renewables could play in this. And yet one point that you make in your paper is that that these are countries that don't really have at the moment that much of a renewable energy infrastructure. So a lot of this energy is coming from fossil fuels. That is one of the problems that you're highlighting here, isn't it?
Yes. So as we know, there's many countries in Africa, and each of these countries has a different energy mix. So we have countries like South Africa that use about 80% energy coming from coal, which is a fossil fuel resource. And then we have countries like Ethiopia and Kenya that use a lot of renewable energy, such as hydropower. So the work shows that in a country that uses a lot of fossil fuel energy, like South Africa, the mycelium composite technology actually becomes very damaging to the environment, and its environmental potential even exceeds the environmental damage that concrete materials could cause. On the other hand, in Kenya or Ethiopia, this environmental impact is reduced drastically by up to 80%, simply because we have renewable energy sources being used there.
Yeah. Okay. So finally, then, what are you saying? The outcome to this paper, presumably not, well, we've got to stop using these composites. Is the message more like, we just have to get more real about the energy costs, that lean as much into renewables as we can? What kind of conclusions might you have here?
So the conclusion is, as much as we like to preach that bio-based materials are renewable and sustainable, it's not right to just assume that they are. And studies need to be conducted to assess what the actual footprint of these materials are. It was interesting to find out that even a technology that's generally considered sustainable can sometimes have a greater environmental impact as compared to concrete, for example, as outlined in the study. So this shows that a life cycle assessment actually plays a very crucial role in preemptively addressing the potential damage that technology could cause to the environment, so that then these challenges could be addressed to mitigate the damage they would cause to the environment.
All right, and there we'll leave it. Thank you very much indeed. That's Stefania Akromah of the University of Bristol. And that'll do us for today, other than to remind you that our email address is hello@somewhereonearth.co. That's hello@somewhereonearth.co. And on WhatsApp, we are international code 44 7486 329 484. So that's code 44 7486 329 484. Go on, program that into your phone right now, and just stay in touch with us via WhatsApp. We're on the socials as well, and we're pretty easy to find, and I'm sure you found us already over there. So the audio this week has been by Dylan Burton. Broadcast content from Lanson's Team Farner, which is where we are right now. Our production manager is Liz Tui. The editor is Anya Viktorovich. I'm Gareth, and we've heard from Pete today as well. Thank you very much, Pete.
Thank you, Gareth.
Absolutely marvellous. We'll see you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.